Person-first language is, I believe, one of the most powerful things that we can do to play a role as community members in responding to the overdose crisis. Addiction or problematic substance use is one of the really few things where we have made a habit of reducing people to these one-word labels. It's not uncommon for us to refer to someone by just saying they're an addict, they're a drug addict. Or there's these more pejorative, these harsher words that have inherent negativity attached to them, like junkie, crackhead, druggie. They dehumanize people and they reduce them to this set of behaviors. Their outward substance use becomes their whole story.
So when we look at the stat of around 75% of people using alone in their home, often dying alone in their home, it begs us to ask the question, why? And often it comes back to two different reasons. One of those being because of misinformation. So this information about the drug supply being so toxic, it's actually not out there. So people are using substances, they're using for recreational reasons, or they're people who are intentionally seeking out substances because of dependency are using, and they don't have the accurate information of how toxic this drug supply actually is. And then the other reason that we see almost always leads back to stigma. So stigma being what isolates people, keeps people alone, keeps people not wanting to share about what they're going through, and then they end up using and dying alone because no one is there to save them. So stigma plays a huge role in the overdose crisis because it's kind of like the sticky glue that keeps people from actually accessing the services that they may need.
I was someone who spent 15 years in severe heroin addiction. I maintained a job. I worked, was housed, drove my car to work every day. I used drugs at work every day. If you'd walked past me on the street during my years in addiction, you would not have had that critical, stereotypical thought looking at me, oh, there goes a drug addict. I didn't have that look. And we judge people in this way. We perceive substance use as a look. Some people are better at masking that pain. I was really good at hiding. I actually felt a strong need to hide my struggle because I knew I had this inherent belief that if people found out what was really going on with me, they would separate themselves from me. I'd be discredited in the eyes of society. I would be considered less than. I remember one day I was at work and I used heroin in the bathroom virtually every day. I remember coming out of the bathroom and coming into contact with some coworkers, and they were in the middle of a conversation and they were all I remember them saying is that they're talking about the junkie across the street. And in that moment, I knew I had to really protect this struggle I had. I had to really work hard to hide my addiction because these guys just thought of me as a junkie. That guy looked a certain way, but I had the same struggle going on inside. I was dealing with the same pain and the same challenges that person was facing. I just somehow was able to maintain my job. I was somehow a little better equipped at hiding it. And that hiddenness, the coroner has called part of this overdose crisis a hidden epidemic because of the extraordinary number of individuals who are dying alone in their homes, who are hiding their struggle because they know that if they come out in public and openly talk about what they're experiencing, they're going to be discredited. We stigmatize people with our language, and people-first language intends and hopes to humanize people that are struggling with substance use disorders. People that are experiencing addiction are more than just that addiction.
There's a huge shame that comes with using substances still, and our hope is to reduce that. Because to be able to, as a society, create safety, to create places for people to go, people to talk to, where there wouldn't be judgment, there wouldn't be stigma, I think that people would actually be willing to share that they're using substances. One of the biggest things that we talk about is not using alone, to have a buddy. because of the toxic drug supply. You don't know what you're taking. So if you overdose, you want someone there to be able to save you with naloxone or rescue breaths. So if people are using alone, that can't happen.
We got to stop just asking the question, why the addiction? And we got to ask what's underneath it. What's the pain that this person is experiencing and trying to mask and cope with and escape from? What are they dealing with underneath the surface? And we have this perception in our societies that some drugs are okay, like alcohol, and other drugs are not okay. And it's almost created something that I would call a stigma hierarchy, where our attitudes have shifted towards cannabis. Cannabis is now legal. As a society at large, we're changing the way we think about cannabis and the people that use it. Our attitudes towards alcohol are pretty open and accepting. We aren't really critical about it. We don't judge people who drink. Most people drink responsibly. Some people don't. Some people do have problems with it. And the stigma hierarchy essentially says that we have these arbitrary reasons for accepting certain substance use and judging other substance use. You have no problem on Friday afternoon telling your coworkers that you're going to go have a glass of wine that weekend or drink a couple beers. You might start feeling comfortable saying that you're going to smoke a joint. That's becoming a little more accepted. But people don't feel able to admit that they might be using cocaine, or that they're struggling with a dependence to some pills, some opioids, or that they're going to go to a rave and do some ecstasy. Huge part of the population uses drugs and doesn't develop addictions. It just stays hidden.
So the root word of stigma actually is Greek, and it means to be marked with a pointed instrument. And what that refers to is when slave owners would actually put a mark on their slaves, and it would indicate that they were no longer human. It was an us and them situation. So if you saw someone with a mark on their forehead, you knew that they were no longer human. I think when we talk about why people use substances, and we really ask that question, and it often leads back to, again, trauma, grief, loss, stress. Those are all emotions, those are all things that we all go through as humans. And why someone would choose to use substances and another person maybe chooses to use things like Netflix or shopping or something that numbs them in the same way that substances might for another person, I think is really good to understand that piece of substance use as well. So I can't put judgment on what I do compared to somebody else. What somebody else is going through, we could be going through the exact same situation. Daniel could lose his job and I could lose my job, and Daniel uses substances and I just kind of numb out with Netflix. We can't compare our stories because I don't know the context. I don't know the layers of his life. I think that when I look back on when I was using substances or coping in a lot of different ways, in some pretty dark spaces, what people did that was helpful was didn't try to change me, didn't try to solve my problems, but let me have space and to talk about what was going on in a non-judgmental and in a safe way. If my parents believed that they were enabling me and then treated me with tough love, I think that would have kept me really isolated, especially as a teenager, where everything was very confusing. I felt alone already, and I didn't need to be told what I was doing was wrong because I already felt that. I didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm gonna start using substances, and I want it to be destructive in my life. I didn't just wake up. No one just wakes up and says, hey, I'm gonna use substances. And yeah, I was trying to feel good and my parents saw that. I was trying to feel normal and my parents saw that. And I think that's the story for anyone I've ever known who uses substances.
And with the toxic drug supply and the amount of fentanyl that has permeated that drug supply and contaminated drugs, including non-opioids, drugs like cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, pills, powders, the risk of overdose is huge, even among those who aren't experiencing addiction. So my hope, my encouragement to people would be that they would start recognizing that these are human beings. They're people first, before they're a drug addict, before they're someone that has a substance use disorder, before they're an alcoholic. They're a person. And we put the person first, we can humanize them. We don't reduce them to their behavior. We give them hope. We dignify them. We see that there's more to them than meets the eye. We recognize that there's potential in those individuals. There's people that saw potential in me when I didn't see it in myself. We don't recognize the power of words. We say things arbitrarily without really recognizing that they have the potential to offer hope or to destroy. One role you can play is by really working hard to adopt people-first language, by literally dropping words like addict or junkie, especially druggie, from your vocabulary. Just stop talking about people that way. Put the person first. My friend is struggling with a substance use disorder, or my friend is struggling with this addiction, or is so much better than my friend's an addict. Like, really, is that all they are? There's a lot more to them than just that. When we hear words like junkie or crackhead, when I say that, I think immediately you have a picture in your mind of what that person might look like and what they're experiencing, what's going on with them, where they might live. And so that's the power of these words. It's how it inherently reduces that individual to a stereotypical person that doesn't even necessarily exist. If you had never met me, but someone had told you that I was a junkie, you have already generated a perception in your mind of who you think you're going to meet, what you think I'm going to be like, what you think I look like, what you think my life is like. You know, I was in a conversation with someone the other day, and they were talking about the alcoholic tradesmen that they were working with. They actually had compassion for the person, and they wanted to help them. And I was saying, really? Like, alcoholic has to come first in that sentence? How about the tradesman who's struggling with alcohol addiction, or the tradesman who's got a substance use disorder? Like, let's put the person first. We can inspire them to see that they're more than just where they're at right now, that they're more than just a one-word label.
How people can help in the overdose crisis and for people in their life who are using substances is to get informed, to know the information, and to really understand the stigma piece and start asking why. And understand that we all play a role. Us as a society, us personally, that we all have a role to play. My role to play is sharing my story and this information. But as a society at large, we all have a vital role to play, which is reducing the stigma, creating safe places for people to go, and being safe people that people can talk to.
One of the things that was a key factor in my years in addiction was how disconnected I felt from people around me. And one of the things we often do in our society is we disconnect people even further that are dealing with substance use problems, that are struggling. We think cutting them off and isolating them and alienating them from us and punishing them is the solution. And Johann Hari has a great phrase about the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. We need to create better and more healthy connections for the individuals around us that are struggling. They're disconnected. I knew I was disconnected. I was intentionally disconnecting all the time. And people that came around me and said, no, we're not going to let you just be alone. We're walking alongside this with you. We're going to meet you where you're at. There's more to you than where you're at today. There's potential in you. And that's one of the roles we can play is we can be a healthy connection point for people in our lives that are struggling. I don't think people that are struggling with addictions need to be disconnected more. I don't think they need to be cut off more. They need to be connected to people that love and care for them. That's what will create change.